Here, south of the Trinity River, about 4.5 miles from the heart of the city, I began. I was born in this old frame house at 1721 Avenue B. It was on this soil that I first played. My earliest memories stem from this church at 8th and Dinley Drive, Greater Shiloh Baptist Church, where I attended kindergarten at the Old Billy's Kindergarten School, as did most black kids who grew up in this section of the city during World War II. Soon I was 6 and started to school here at N.W. Harlee, which is just across the street from the kindergarten. Daily we used this old cemetery as a shortcut between home and school. Frequently we kids plucked flowers from this old graveyard and snatched honeysuckle vines for our teachers, who apparently did know the difference, but consented to the illusion that we had gathered the flowers from our own gardens at home. It was in this old cemetery that I first learned the difference between black folk and white folk, or the difference it made if your skin was black. It was at this old fence that I first heard the word nigger used by a white man. He was a gray-haired old man who stood yonder ways and shouted at a group of us, "You niggers get to the other side of the fence." What he meant was to the colored section. Frightened, we ran, but we retreated back to the fence, climbed over, and continued to use the graveyard as a shortcut to school each day. Part of growing up in this section of the city was to learn to tell time by train whistles. Black children and white children played along this old railroad track, and skinny dipped in this old creek. A few times we even fought, but never racially. Oftentimes blacks and whites fought on the same side. Most of the kids would say, "We all have one thing in common. We are Oak Cliff kids." Among my childhood buddies was a white boy whose name was Billy Ray Burnett. Each summer, Billy would bake in the sun and try to get as black as I. Obviously, he never made it, but we black children accepted him anyway. After we turned 6 years old, Billy and I would compare our schoolwork and discuss events at our respective schools. Billy went to Roger Q. Mills, and I, Harlee. Both Billy's mother and my mother tried to explain that we were both God's children, but some people questioned God's ability to make the world and disliked many people because they were different. But to be honest, Billy and I agreed that grown-ups were all mixed up. The despair of segregation came when we talked about movies. We saw the same pictures, but at separate theaters. In 1954, our frame house was demolished in a storm, and a white lady from the Red Cross came and offered my mother financial aid and an apartment in the colored section of the West Dallas Housing Project. My mother accepted, and she and her bunch moved into the Eggleward Place in West Dallas. At that time, it was considered a luxury to be fortunate enough to live in a well-heated place, spacious and clean. At one time, blacks, whites, and Mexican Americans lived in this community of some 3,500 individual units. 1,500 for blacks, 1,500 for whites, and 500 for Mexican Americans. Just as there were separate sections for living, there were separate schools flanking the projects. During that time, there were no high schools in West Dallas. Although there were high schools in Oak Cliff, they were for white only, and black children were forced to take streetcars or buses to either South Dallas at Lincoln High School or North Dallas at Booker Washington High School. But rain, shine, sleet, or snow, black students were drawn into the mainstream of life for about 30 minutes in the morning and the return trip home in the afternoon. We were called commuters. We commuters had to pass all white schools to get to our places at all black schools. One could say busing was popular. With bus tokens, token cards, and pennies, we made our way across the city. But as the two Negro schools began to get too crowded, the old Forest Avenue High was turned over to blacks, as were many of the old homes that made up that once plush section along Park Row. But there were no civil rights laws then, and blacks did not earn enough money to take care of their families and keep up the big houses, and soon the neighborhood was turning into another ugly slum. Controversy arose when rumors circulated that the white folks did not want the Negro children graduating from the same schools they did. and the name of Forest Avenue High was covered by a sign or signs. James Madison High School. The school's colors were changed from green and white to green and gold, and the Forest Avenue lawn died because black Trojans moved in. Living in the projects where many families were on relief, I frequently heard my schoolmates explain to attendance deans that they had missed school because they did not have car fare, or because there was just enough money in the family for one student to pay his bus fare, and the other children had to rotate days going to school. Football was king even in those years, and at black schools, second to football was the traditional fair day, or to be exact, Negro Achievement Day, as it was called. Each year, the second Monday during fair season was designated for blacks, and Negroes from all over Texas came to compete in the huge all-black parade. The only whites in the parade were the white policemen or firemen who frequently carried the American flag. We were told by some of our teachers to spend only money for the Cotton Bowl game, which featured our boys, but not to ride on the Midway, which at that time was open to blacks only on special occasions. Segregation, demonstration, and congregation were words frequently heard during the late 50s. The liberal white churches were asking the colored churches, "What can we do to help?" Or more dramatic, "What do you colored people want?" A great deal of my youth was spent in this old isolated building. It was the Freeman Clinic for Children. We always entered through this door because it was accessible to the colored section of the waiting room. St. Paul and Methodist hospitals assigned their colored patients to rooms in their basements. All of the hospitals were segregated. However, when blacks were in such numbers, they overflowed the white section. Blacks were allowed to sit in the white side, starting at the rear. Things in Dallas have changed in the past decade. Once the Cotton Bowl Stadium was darkened by black faces, only one day each year, and that was Negro Achievement Day. Now it is just as important to black Cowboy fans as to white Cowboy fans to attend the football games at the Cotton Bowl. And on the way home, our black mothers can feed our sisters and brothers at local drive-ins and restaurants. Once they were only able to take a greasy bag from the rear door or the colored window. Black awareness is growing in Texas, but in all the specified demands for black activities, I am saddened to see that we have neglected one of our heritage, the Juneteenth. The Juneteenth was the 19th of June, a time of happiness, a time to put away hostilities, and a time for celebration. It was a time of black awareness when we were proud to learn that our forefathers had been freed on this day after learning of the Emancipation Proclamation, which was issued on January the 1st of the same year.